welcome to another episode of the Marvel Masterworks podcast and Vidcast. As always, I'm your host, Adam. And with me is my co host, the Emerald Enthusiast, but for this podcast, we will call him the Venom Enthusiast because we have a movie review to do. And it's not the movie everybody's talking about this weekend, as of this recording. It's one that preceded it, but because we are still in. Oh, Donnie, first of all, say your.
Hey, what's up, comic book fans? It's the man whose ring runs on fanboy energy, the podcasting machine, the big nerd in green. It's the Emerald Enthusiast telling you we will not chicken out. We will feed your brain with Venom content today.
Yes. And as I was saying
You
before,
get it? Chicken.
yeah, I do get it. Yeah. And now I'm hungry for chicken. By the way, I think I'm having
Dad
chicken
joke.
tonight.
Dad joke.
Uh, I'm actually having barbecue chicken tonight. So
Oh, Sonny and Cher.
anyway, you can come over. Yeah, sure. As long as you pass all the protocols and things like that, sure. But yeah, we are going to be reviewing Venom: Let There Be Carnage. Because I mean, Donnie was fortunate enough to see it in a drive-in. I almost said drive-through.
I've said drive through multiple
Where
times.
he could get chicken. I think KFC has drive-through now. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Actually, I did have chicken in the car with me. I did.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're reviewing Venom because we haven't done it because we both saw it later than normally expected because of the fact that we are still, unfortunately, in the throes of a global pandemic. And neither Donnie or I feel particularly comfortable sitting in a packed theater. So you will have to wait for your Spider-Man No Way Home review from us because neither of us have seen it. But when we do, we will, of course, bring you our thoughts. Um, Before we do get to the Venom Let There Be Carnage review, though, Donnie, I do want to um, discuss briefly the success of Spider-Man No Way Home thus far.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, so what we're seeing is that on its opening Friday, um, let me pull it up real quick here. The numbers, the numbers. Here we go. This is a lot easier than doing math because math is not my was never my forte. But so on its opening Friday, domestically, Spider-Man: No Way Home, which is the third Sony uh, Marvel Studios collaboration. Um, Spider-Man: No Way Home on Friday grossed 121.5
Wow.
million dollars
Impressive.
in North America. Um, Overseas, it has already amassed $181.4 million. That, that is insane, Donnie.
Mm-hmm.
That's pre-pandemic
Right.
numbers.
Yeah, well, I think people are desperate, and that's not always a good thing. But the hype machine for this has been going for years, obviously.
Yeah.
So this is not something where a studio needed to hype people up for it. It was already there, and obviously we are seeing people respond to this movie being out in theaters.
And look, I don't folks, this is great for superhero movies. It's great for the movie industry, but I do not expect this to be the norm anytime soon.
Right.
This is very situational for this movie. Like I don't know when we'll see this again, this number again. Um, this is unique to Spider-Man: No Way Home. because it is bringing together three generations of Spider-Man on film fandoms,
Right.
right? Because you have, the villains from the Raimiverse, the Webverse, and I guess wait,
Oh, yeah. The
are
Marvel
there
Cinematic Universe.
are there
Yeah.
MCU villains in this, or is it just? I'm trying
You
to
know,
think.
I don't know. I do know there is a surprise, and I don't. I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But
Well, I've
there's
seen,
a
and
there's another universe involved. We'll just leave it at that.
yeah, I've heard,
Beyond the two we just named.
and seen.
It came across my timeline as well on Twitter. Avoid Twitter if you don't want spoilers.
I didn't post it, right? It wasn't me, right?
Mm,
I didn't retweet it. Okay,
yeah.
you didn't get spoiled for me, which is good.
Yeah.
But
I
I will
wasn't
say,
aware of what I was watching until I was about 10 seconds into it, and then I was hooked. So,
now to be fair, what I'll say is, because I am making the choice not to see it in theaters. Look, if I see it, if I see something, I'm not gonna get bent out of shape because I'm making the choice. I'm on social media. I know that the chances of me seeing it, seeing something, are good, and I willingly accept that. I'm making the choice not to go to the theater. It is what it is. But for the respect of the people that don't want that, I won't say anymore. But just to go back to the box office, I mean, that's impressive. They're projecting, Donnie. If it continues to go in this fashion, um, the estimate for the entire weekend on a global scale is between 550 and 625 million dollars.
wow.
Um,
That would be amazing in the pre-pandemic era.
yeah, you know
That
what that
wow.
is, Donnie? I'll tell you what that is. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a factual, true, legitimate global phenomenon.
Right.
It's not some BS PR term used to sell a streaming service in Latin America. That's like, to me, that's a global phenomenon. Okay, forget social media imprints, hashtagging, coordinated times to hashtag, and all that BS. This is a legitimate global phenomenon. There's no two ways to slice it. So that's what I wanted. I had to take that shot. I'm sorry. Moving on. I'm happy that this is doing well. I hope to God that people are watching this movie in the theater safely and responsibly. Because, yeah, the box office numbers are going up, but I don't also want to see, you know, case counts
Hospitalizations going
of
up,
the
right.
virus is going up. So enjoy your movies responsibly. That's
Be
all I'm saying.
careful. Be careful, Spidey fans.
That's my recommendation. But
Yes.
but good for the movie. I can't wait to see it myself.
Likewise. Yeah.
And when we do, of course, we will bring you a review right here.
On Multiverse Musings, the Vidcast, available right here on YouTube, also available on iTunes and Podbean.
Way to bring that shameless plug home, Donnie.
Hey, you set me up. I just knocked the goal into the net, man.
Yeah, that was a good assist by me, and that's probably the only assist I'll be seeing for the next couple of days because my team isn't playing hockey because of this friggin'
No.
pandemic. Anyway, enough of the bad stuff. Let's talk about the good stuff. Venom, Let There Be Carnage. So, Donnie, let's get right into it. What's going on in this movie?
Well, let's start with this. Opens up with the origin of Shriek. And in this version, we actually feel really sorry for Frances here. It opens up with her being taken away from Cletus because we see that her powers are manifesting in a way that are uncontrollable. And so we see her taken to Ravencroft. In
Which
the
is the
pro
Arkham Asylum of the Spider-Man universe.
There you go. That's a good way to put it, sir. So we see early on, this is it's a good fitting tone for Venom. We see kind of a morally kind of ambiguous scene here because she's taken away and she hurts Patrick Mulligan, who's a character we'll talk about more, but you understand why she reacts the way she does. So she hurts Patrick Mulligan, he hurts her, and again, not always the clear cut good and bad in a lot of Venom stories. You can kind of see multiple points of view, which is why I feel like the Venom comics in so many ways are just wonderful experiences. So, Shriek, by the way, Naomi Harris, she is then tormented with news. Again, this is
Yeah.
modern day. She's tormented by the news of Cletus's impending execution. And this is done so by Dr. Camille Pazzo. And I thought she was actually pretty sadistic in this. She
Yeah.
seemed to take a lot of glee in
Yeah, she
tormenting
did. Yeah, yeah,
Francis.
yeah.
Yeah. So uh, then the and I'm going to laugh all the way through this podcast.
That's fine.
We open up in with Eddie coming to the police station to talk to Patrick Mulligan, and we instantly get the scene in the stall because the symbiote's hungry. So Eddie pulls him into the bathroom, and even though this is a dark movie for the most part, there's so much humor. It's infused in such a way that it's so perfect. And we see Eddie and the symbiote arguing in the stall with a woman in the stall next to them who of course can't hear the symbiote.
Right.
So who knows what she thinks Eddie is talking to. And they have I have to say, first of all, Tom Hardy, I think, is in the conversation for one of the greatest comic book castings ever. Now,
Absolutely.
now, I don't think that there's ever going to be a definitive answer to that. You can talk about Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. You can talk about a lot of people would say
Yeah.
Christopher Reeve as Superman. Some people would say Wesley Snipes as Blade. But I think you have to include Tom Hardy in this because this franchise works because he's so great.
Yeah, it's his performance and his ability to that banter between the two, the symbiote and Eddie. That's what sells the movie. I mean, okay, the action sells the movie, but that that is the heart of the movie. The relationship
Right,
between the two characters is
right.
the heart of the
So,
movie.
right. And that's what I had been saying for years. And of course, there were a lot of people out there who were kind of like the Snyder cultists that you talked about, who would say the only thing people want to see is Venom versus Spider-Man, nothing else. That's the only thing. And I'm like, there's plenty of comics where Venom advanced beyond just being a Spider-Man character.
Imagine that, Donnie. People, can you imagine these people read the comics?
Wow. And hey, just because you like something doesn't mean somebody else is not going to like something different.
That kind of
Obviously,
reminds me of something I read yesterday, Donnie. Somebody said the only way DC can compete with Marvel is if they restore the Snyderverse, and I'm like, really? Now, Donnie, off topic for 2 seconds, but correct
go
me if
ahead.
I'm wrong. The last two DC billion-dollar movies, Aquaman and Joker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Neither was directed by Zack Snyder, correct?
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I want to know. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're by no means anti-Snyder here. We're
Right.
just,
I'm
yeah,
anti the idiots that think he's the be all and end all. That's what I'm anti.
right, exactly. There can be multiple versions of
Yeah.
characters,
Yeah.
multiple directors. I actually heard a lot of the same stuff again 10 years ago when Sony rebooted after Raimi. Now, I wanted to see that end. I mean, I wanted to see that have a conclusion.
Yeah.
I didn't want to see it end. I wanted to see a fourth movie. But when I heard they couldn't do that and they were rebooting it and doing Spider-Man again, I saw people lose their minds. I understand liking that, but there were people just like the world will never accept anything
Yeah.
except
I mean, look,
Raimi.
there's a lot of. I think and it's gotten worse, Donnie, because, and I'll tell you why it's gotten worse. The MCU has spoiled people into thinking that these actors are going to play these roles forever.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm an old school superhero movie fan. So I'm of the philosophy, the opinion that, all right, typically an actor, if everything goes well, is going to get 3 movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, much like a comic book, the entire creative team, which are act is going to change. Like,
Excellent point.
and actors and directors and screenwriters are essentially the creative the movie equivalent of a comic creative team. So they're going to have their time They're going to be off the book,
There you go.
and a new team's going to come on. You may like it more, less, or the same, but the thing will continue. It'll be a little different, and that's okay.
Right. And again, there were lots of people who said, okay, we've got a new starting point for Spider-Man. We're going to support this. People like myself who have an allegiance to the character and to the mythos, not
Yeah,
just to a particular version. I was just
that's
like,
me.
okay,
That's me.
well, this is
The
where we are now. And
character.
and it happened again. I mean, we didn't get to see the end of the web verse, but we got this other good version of Spider-Man.
Yeah,
So,
and think about it, Donnie. Even Venom, right? I mean, there, there was a version that you weren't 100% keen on, the Topher
oh,
Grace
that's understatement.
version, right? But luckily, the character is popular enough that you knew Sony was going to try again, and here we are with this version. And I don't know how many more movies Tom Hardy has in him, but you know, he'll have a number of movies, one, two, however many left, and then eventually we'll see another version of Venom, and that's how it'll go.
Yeah. Again, as long as it's a good actor, someone who looks like a grown adult man, got no issue with it. But
There's your thing. There's your thing. There it is.
there you go. So back to performances. Speaking of perfection, Woody Harrelson as Cletus Cassidy, aka Carnage, absolutely amazing. If you've ever seen Natural Born Killers, which is not a kids movie, by the way, which I have seen, parts of that were hard to watch. It was extremely violent, but I knew that Woody Harrelson could pull off this type of character because he did so previously. I
Yeah,
also
no,
want to
he was
make
good.
mention of you get the drawing scene after we see the initial meeting between Eddie and Cletus, and that shows just how vast the symbiote's abilities are because you're talking about very quick, very skillful replication of what the symbiote saw. I also noticed that in Cletus's cell there were various pictures, including a bat and a spider, and there was also a quote from oh gosh, I believe it was Dracula, and which seems to like lend itself to the idea that maybe Morbius already exists in this world, possibly
Yeah,
some
I was gonna
version of
say with the bat,
yeah.
that's clearly a nod to Morbius.
Mhm. And again, we also there's
Unless
another
the Flash has really screwed up the timeline and somehow.
what have you done,
Wait
Barry?
a minute, wait a minute. Spoilers. No, okay, now I know it's exclusive, like like the Scoopers do. Now I figured it out, Donnie. Michael Keaton's been in hiding all along. He's not Adrian Toomes the Vulture. He's really Bruce Wayne playing Matches Malone, playing Adrian Toomes, and he's Batman, and that's going to be the reveal
Yeah.
in Morbius.
All right. But again, and we also see another illusion later on with the spider, with Cletus smashing the spider, that perhaps some version of Spider-Man already exists in this universe.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah. So we also see that Patrick Mulligan, who's a character who will become increasingly important, he doesn't like Eddie. He and Eddie don't get along. Now, the symbiote isn't just content to investigate the things that Cletus tells him. He wants brains. And he says that multiple times. He's not content with the chicken. He needs human brains. He needs phenyethylamine. And that is,
It's a little
again,
disturbing.
yeah, exactly. There's actually a story called Venom the Hunger where he does indeed, after years of threatening to do so, he actually does eat a human brain. Later on, he learns that there's enough of it in chocolate to where if the symbiote takes in enough chocolate, he doesn't have to eat brain.
That's a good substitute.
Hmm? And now we see that played out. Eddie and the symbiote go to Mrs. Chen's store, which, by the way, one of the first Easter eggs I picked up on, there's a magazine there called Shaken Comic Syndrome featuring the likeness of the late, great Stan Lee.
That's an awesome way to honor Stan and have him cameo at the same time.
Yes. I I absolutely love that because, again, while, David Michelinie and Todd McFarlane are, technically, they are the creators of Venom,
Yeah.
but, it started before then with the Spider-Man mythos. You have to give some credit to Stan Lee too.
Yeah, I mean, if
So,
Spider-Man doesn't exist, neither does Venom,
right. So,
right? So they're kind of siblings in a way.
so then we get an interesting scene in an alley. I think it may have been inspired by, the Lethal Protector number
I
one
was
that we
gonna say
talked
that.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's different. It's a different looking woman, but it's the same scenario where this woman is getting mugged. Venom intervenes. In the comic, he actually kills the person by basically suffocating them with tendrils. In this one, the person gets away. And Eddie convinces the symbiote not to eat the person's brain. But that's what echoed in my mind is that first scene of Venom being the Lethal Protector in Venom Lethal Protector number one.
yeah. And
So
doesn't he say something similar where he's like, where the woman screams and he's like, "You're welcome," and he jumps away or something?
yeah, exactly. She screams in the comics, and I like what he said in the movie. He's like, she didn't know she needed our help,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
but she's terrified, much
yeah.
in the same way the woman was in the comic.
And who wouldn't be? I mean, imagine.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe us as comic fans would be like, "Hey, it's Venom, all right."
right. Well, and again, that's part of the aura of Venom is that he protects people in such a way that's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah,
You know, he's not Thor, who's going to come in, and with a square jaw and everything like that, and say, "Hey,
yeah.
everything
Like
is
the cape
okay."
gives it away.
Yeah,
Okay, this guy's here to help, not to, you know.
right. In fact, and that's something again that I think the movie gets right is that Eddie's apartment, even after Eddie is successful with this story he breaks about Cletus, and you see all the bodies recovered, his apartment still looks like crap.
Yeah,
Eddie always looks like he has a fever, and then, he always looks a little grungy.
a little
That's Eddie
disheveled.
Brock.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's Eddie Brock. That's Venom. He kind of struggles to have himself together. He always has. So now, back to the narrative. Just after saving that woman, Eddie gets a call, and you hear the symbiote go, It's Anne on the phone." And you see that the symbiote is very enamored still with Anne weighing.
I'm trying to figure out who loves Anne more, Eddie or the symbiote.
Well, exactly. They both seem to, and I love the fact that you see that the symbiote has developed feelings for her separately from Eddie. It's not just
Yeah,
the symbiote trying to help Eddie. The symbiote really loves her too.
yeah, it's pretty funny. Yeah,
Yeah. In fact, when she calls Eddie and sets up a meeting and shows him the ring that she's going to get married to Dan, I like how the symbiote was like, "We're going to make you cry now." She'll love it. And you see Tom Hardy showing us Eddie Brock struggling to hold back the tears that the symbiote is trying to produce. It was brilliant. I
yeah.
absolutely love that.
No, the back and forth and it's not just the vocal difference. It's the mannerisms, the looks that he gives in the run up to, uh, you know, one taking control of the situation or the other. That really sells it too. It's not just the alternate voice.
You know, and I'll say that there is so much that happens that Tom Hardy has to sell
Hmm.
thinking about the dialogue of the symbiote in his head.
Yeah,
And he does that so skillfully. We are so lucky as Venom fans to have somebody in that lead role.
well, I don't know if you heard, but you know that he actually records all the Venom dialogue, and
Mm-hmm.
then when he's doing the Eddie Brock scene, he has like something in his ear that they feed it back to him.
Right,
So when he does the scene, he hears the response of Venom in his ear.
right. But he has to sell that. It's not somebody
Yeah,
speaking to him that he can play
yeah,
off of.
yeah,
He hears
definitely.
this and he
Yeah,
has to sell that to you,
yeah, definitely agreed.
which he does with his body, with his facial expressions.
100% agreed. Yeah,
So Cletus, of course, blames Eddie for his execution being reinstated. The animated flashbacks to Saint Estes are brilliant. I loved
Oh,
it. I
yeah,
love, oh man, the visual of Eddie and Cletus sitting on a like metaphorical table, staring at one another throughout the years, recounting Cletus's abuse as a child. Ah, it was brilliant.
yeah. Doing the origin in that animated fashion was very clever,
Mm-hmm.
very unique. I haven't seen that much in comic book films. The only one I saw that I can remember seeing it in was Harley Quinn recounting her origin in Birds of Prey.
Right. I thought it worked perfectly for what they were doing here, you know.
But here it was different because they did it alongside the live action
Yeah.
stuff.
So things cut to Eddie talking to Cletus as his execution is imminent. And again, I love the different point of view here where when they go to the prison, Venom calls it an all you can eat buffet. He wants to eat all their brains. And of course, Eddie's like, wait a minute. He was like, sometimes people compulsively confess, like the Sin Eater in the comics. Sometimes people are wrongfully convicted. So Eddie has some compassion and he sees the shades of gray that maybe justice isn't always served. Venom says lions don't eat salad. It's like, I just want to eat any brain I smell, you know, and I really like that give and take between the two of them.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he sees he sees prison. Um, you by he I mean Venom,
Mhm.
and he sees okay now these guys I can eat because they're bad,
Right.
right? But like you were saying, Eddie's like, well, not necessarily. There it could be a wrongful conviction.
Mhm.
Maybe they confessed for a specific reason, but they didn't do it. So
Yeah. So Cletus brings up, and I want to call everyone's attention to this. One of my favorite parts of this movie, which I think, and it filled in a gap, I believe, in the first movie. Cletus brings up the fact that Eddie was resented by his father because Eddie's mother died giving birth to Eddie. If you want to know why Eddie Brock is kind of screwed up, why he makes all these crazy decisions in his life, it's not about the Sin Eater. It's not about Spider Man. It's because Eddie hated himself. There was this huge hole and all these psychological scars that were left by Carl Brock
yeah,
long before Spider Man, long before his adulthood. That's what Carl Brock did to Eddie Brock. And that's
yeah,
the man that we see in the comics. And I love the fact that they brought it up there. And so that's why Eddie is just why he sometimes makes these confusing decisions because he's somebody who didn't have a lot of nurturing.
yeah.
So
No,
I really like that part. So
agreed. And it was nice to see brought up in the movie.
mhm. Another thing I want to say here, usually I'm going to say that the comics are better when it comes to movies adapting comics, but I think they actually made an improvement here with the way that Cletus gets the symbiote, his part of the symbiote. The bite really kept up with the tone of this. It was vicious, it was fast. And I like that more so than which I like the story of, part of the symbiote being left behind in prison and Cletus getting that through a cut and it going into his bloodstream, which is why Carnage is red. But I like the bite here and then Cletus kind of eating the little bit of the symbiote that he had.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you kind of made the point for me. I was gonna ask you because I couldn't remember how Carnage got like became a thing.
They were cellmates, Eddie and Cletus.
Right. Okay. So, but yeah, when I saw it, I'm like, yeah, that works. I don't know if it's comic accurate, but it makes logical sense.
Yeah,
Or I mean, as much logical sense as something like that could make.
right. Not exactly comic accurate, but in my opinion, I think an improvement the way it did. It worked for the movie.
Yeah, there
Speaking
are there
of
are times there are times when sometimes the adaptation is better than
Right.
than the comic. For example, um, the I think the ending of Watchmen, the movie, is better
Mm-hmm.
than the comic, and I think Batman Begins is a more thrilling origin story for Batman than Year One is.
Okay.
So, you know,
Speaking of, the way the symbiote was spawned, the symbiote can reproduce asexually.
oh,
So I wouldn't rule out that in part 3 that Anne is carrying Dylan already because she's had the symbiote on her twice.
mm.
So I thought about that as, again, reading the
And
comics.
knowing the symbiote, he'd be like, "Yeah, let's make that
I
happen."
can, and I can totally envision a scene in Venom 3 of her showing up at Eddie's door and saying, "This doesn't belong to Dan," and Eddie be like, "Wait a minute, we haven't been together for a while," and then Eddie going, "Venom," and Venom going, "Sorry." I
But
can
now I want to see that. Yeah, yeah,
totally envision that. So I wouldn't rule out that we see Dylan in part 3. So
yeah. I'm down, especially now with the comic.
mhm,
I could definitely see some synergy there.
mhm. Now, Eddie and the symbiote have broken up multiple times in the comic, and we see that reflected here. After the breakup with Anne, obviously they're both very emotional. And we see this fight in Eddie's apartment, which was, the visuals were brilliant and the tone was hilarious.
Yeah, when he kicks him out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the symbiote tries to kick Eddie out of his own apartment. Get out, get your things and get out. Eddie's like, "This is my house." And I'm like, "Well, it's not a house, it's an apartment." But
And he's like, okay, and he leaves. Or he's like, fine.
and I loved in the middle of all that, what's Eddie worried about?
The TV.
The TV.
I would have been worried about it too. I mean, when
Exactly.
when 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 the symbiote throws the TV out the window, I'm like, that was a perfectly fine TV that you just wasted.
Yeah.
Very much.
Exactly. And he says a $2,000 TV.
Yeah.
And I and I like the fact, and I'm sure there are some PETA people who got upset about this, but Eddie was like, "If you don't stop, I'm gonna kill the chicken." And he holds him up, and the symbiote's like, "You would not dare." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I dare."
It's such a hilariously dysfunctional relationship.
I loved it. Yeah. Well, Dan even says at one point, he's like, "Those two could use some couples counseling."
Oh, I'd pay to see that.
So then we move on to Cletus's attempted execution. And I really love the phrase that he said right before the chaos breaks out, "Something wicked this way comes." That's a quote from Macbeth, which I thought was perfect here. A touch of Shakespeare in the middle of all this makes it so much better.
Yeah.
And we see the first appearance of Carnage, who is absolute perfection. The way he comes out, the tendrils, his means of locomotion, the uh, 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 the red and the black, the blend of those, the way his mouth moves. I loved it so much. I wish I could talk to my college self who wanted to see this so badly and say, "Look, it's going to be a long time. It's going to be a long wait, but it will be worth it."
Yeah, it's really interesting because visually, when you look at Carnage, he looks meaner, more violent, scarier than Venom.
Mm-hmm.
But even his motions are more chaotic,
Right.
disruptive than Venom's are.
Right. Yeah. So, and I like the
But yeah,
fact that,
look wise, it was perfect. Yeah, I
oh
mean,
man,
I
and the
couldn't
like,
ask for a better translation.
yeah. So Carnage seemingly kills most of the prisoners and well, everybody in the building, and I like the fact that you immediately get the vibe that Carnage kills because he likes it.
Yeah,
That's his motivation. He doesn't murder to prove a point. He doesn't murder for revenge. He doesn't do it for style points like the Joker. He revels in the fact that he has the ability to kill people.
yeah,
He likes it.
it's just fun.
yeah, it's fun for him, and the scene, the death by tongue, where he puts it down the throat of that one prison guard. That's actually from Carnage Unleashed #3. That was inspired by a scene in that. Um,
Okay.
if you ever get a chance to read, it's a one shot called Carnage Mind Bomb. It
Hmm.
is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read
Hmm.
because you get to see how Carnage thinks. You get to see how he sees the world through his eyes. And it is, like I said, it is very unnerving. Now, it's not, like seeing a horror movie or something like that. It's still a comic book, but if you read it and you think about the way he sees the world, it is, again, it's very disturbing.
Um, maybe one day we'll read that.
Yeah, like I said, I would be up for reviewing that.
All right. All
So
right.
we cut to Ravencroft, where Carnage. Ravencroft is actually where Carnage met Shriek in the comics. Was Spider-Man? Was it Spider-Man Unlimited #1? I know it was the first installment of Maximum Carnage. Was where Shriek was. Yeah, Spider-Man Unlimited #1, 1993, and I love the meeting of those two. The fact
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
not only does he kill Dr. Pazzo, and who, by the way, was Carnage's psychiatrist in the comics,
Hmm.
but the hugging of the cell that Shriek was in, the way he did that with the tendrils and like hugged his way to her, I thought that was brilliant. You felt that relationship, even though they're the bad guys, they really did have affection for one another.
I agree. Absolutely. Absolutely. You can definitely see that. I 100% correct.
And by the way, I thought the CGI for her abilities was top notch as well.
Right.
You felt that when she shrieked, you felt that. So
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
yeah. And the breakout scene where Cletus with the car. I actually watched some of the behind the scenes footage where they actually built kind of like a little roller coaster ramp. So when
Okay.
he's like going up and like using the symbiote to like to get her and to get at the helicopter, it was really well done. And that's what again, Carnage uses his symbiote that way in the comics. It's not, he doesn't just stab and stuff. He makes things kind of like constructs. He uses it in that manner, and that's what part of what makes him dangerous.
How
So
did I know you were going to relate it back to Green Lantern, man?
when it comes to my favorite Marvel and DC characters, I can find a place to reference them at any point. So
I'm going to try and come up with something on one of these episodes. I'm going to come up with something totally random, unrelated to the Green Lantern, and watch as you try and relate it back to Green Lantern.
I bet you I could do it.
I have no doubt you could.
Well,
We'll make it a drinking game next time we do a Green Lantern episode.
okay. Well, like I said, I'll have my water. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and then the listeners can get drunk.
right. So we see at this point that Venom kind of goes out on the town,
Yeah.
and he finds this. I don't know how to say it, this club. Lots of people in there. They are dressed in costumes. A lot of people, I've seen fans react to this online. They felt like this was kind of an allegory for the LGBTQ community because Eddie Venom talks about
Oh,
coming.
Betty, that's the way. That's the
Betty,
way
yeah,
I'm gonna.
Betty. There you go. See, I came up with a new ship name, but Venom talks about coming out of the Eddie closet, and he also wears the rainbow colors when he has
Yeah,
that string or
it's
whatever,
like
the plastic. Yeah,
almost like a Hawaiian lake kind of deal.
yeah. And he talks about how everyone should be able to get along on Earth, and people should be allowed to be who they are. A lot of people took it that way.
But I like how he said, I'm out of
I'm out of the
Eddie's."
Eddie closet.
Yeah, out of the Eddie closet. Yeah,
And
which
I like how he panics when he gets on the mic and the guy goes, "I love you," and he was like, "Thank you, one person."
yeah, which when he says that, I know it's an allegory for
Yeah.
revealing that you're gay, but he literally means it, like legitimately. For him, it's not an. It's like legitimate. It's like he's out of the Eddie closet, literally,
Right.
like
Exactly.
like a literal.
Yeah. But of course, instantly we see that when he leaves the club, that he's thinking about Eddie. He's like, I wish you could have seen me tonight, Eddie. So Eddie is still on his mind.
Yeah, yeah.
And we also see, again, we talk about a little bit of moral ambiguity here. Everyone that the symbiote is jumping on, he is seemingly wearing
It's
them
killing.
out.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, how many people did he kill before he got back to Mrs. Chen?
But it's Venom, so it's like,
Right. So another thing I want to say is that I would have liked to have seen, and I don't have many criticisms of this, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more carnage because I liked how you saw Cletus going down the road when he's going to rescue Shriek, and he's just knocking cars out of his way
yeah,
just because he can. You know, he beats up that store clerk when he's trying to find her just because he felt like doing it. We could have seen a little bit more of that because I think that established his personality well. But what we
yeah,
saw was perfect. So we see eventually that Anne and the the scene where Anne figures out that Mrs. Chen is wearing is wearing the Venom costume.
yeah.
I loved her seduction of the Venom. She was like, "Come out, you big sexy hero," and he's like, you can see his face. He's like, "Tell me more." And
Yeah.
Dan's like, "I'm right here." And nobody likes you, Dan. Shut up.
And then I like the part when it's like, when she's like, when she gets fed up about doing the routine, she's like, all right, cut it out. You need to say, you need to help me save Eddie, or
Yep.
Eddie needs you. He's like, that jackass can fend for himself.
And I love when she finally, when the symbiote breaks Eddie out of prison and or breaks Eddie out from the police station, and they're face to face, and it's of course Anne has the symbiote, and Eddie's talking to her, and she says, "You have to apologize," and he starts to apologize, and you hear the symbiote say, "Not the right tone."
I
There's
could not stop laughing.
uh,
It's funny. I told you I have a tradition of, you know, watching these movies with my mom, and even she was bawling with laughter. She couldn't
yeah.
stop.
And and I loved when Dan and Anne were preparing to drive away, and the symbiote says, "If we save the day, can we call ourselves the Lethal Protector?" And Eddie's like, "That's so '80s."
Yeah, is that the moment you were talking about?
No, no, the moment that I'm talking about comes later on, and I'll get to
Okay,
that.
okay. All right, save it then. Yeah.
Yeah. So we see that actually Cletus captures Patrick Mulligan. Shriek shows up trying to capture Eddie, who, by the way, she breaks in his apartment and calls him Brockolicious. She's
Yeah.
like, Brockolicious, where are you? It's little things like that's why I couldn't stop laughing. But of course, she ends up capturing Anne, which lures Eddie to the church where they're having the Red Wedding. So, by the way,
Which is a nod to Game of Thrones.
yeah, yeah, but it totally makes sense with Carnage. I also loved Shriek's dress because she wears a lot of black attire in the comics, and I loved how that. I loved how she looked in that. I mean, it was perfect. I would have liked maybe a little bit of makeup, like the symbol around her eye or something.
Yeah, yeah, like in the comic. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, but she looked great there. Cletus, of course, has the kind of attire that he wears in the comics. I also like the fact that Cletus over the years has become a little bit more of the way he speaks is kind of, and I'm not trying to insult anybody here, but kind of like a yokel, kind of country redneck type. He talks like that in the comics, and a lot of the ways that Woody Harrelson spoke in this, you saw that reflected.
Mirrored that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So now, if I have one
The guy's
criticism,
name is
go ahead.
Cletus, so it kind of.
Well, yeah, like I said, I mean, and I'm not trying to insult anybody.
Yeah,
I
I'm
just
not
the
talking
way,
about
yeah.
how many people do you know that are named Cletus?
There's the one on The Simpsons. That's the only one I know. So, who's named the slack jawed yokel? So, anyway, so uh, one thing that I want to bring up, and again, we talked about why the symbiote is red, but I didn't quite understand Venom's reaction to the Carnage symbiote.
Okay.
Because now it was funny when Eddie bursts into the church and he was like, where is she? And all of a sudden the symbiote's like, whoa, that's a red one. And I was like, well, what does that mean from the symbiote's perspective?
Right.
What is that? I don't remember like a specific like segment of the Clintar that are like crazed or something, and they're identified by being red. I don't know. So yeah, it was funny when Eddie was trying to convince the symbiote to come back out, but that didn't quite make sense to me.
Maybe that's something we'll discover as we go along.
Yeah, could be. So I loved it when he was like, time to die. And Eddie's like, that's the spirit. And the symbiote's like, no, we are going to die. I want to watch. I've already watched it 4 times since I got the Blu-ray. I want to watch it again.
I can't wait to rewatch it again. Yeah.
Also, I should point out, I love the fight. Maybe the fight scene second only to the Avengers fight scene for me. I absolutely loved every second of it. Early on, including the Lex Luger style elbow. Did you notice
Yeah,
Eddie jump
I
up
saw
and
that.
did
Yeah.
it? Exactly.
Is that the
I
moment?
love. Yeah. It wasn't like Macho Man coming off the ropes. It was jumping up like Luger did. Luger rarely hit that, by the way. But yeah.
Yeah.
So I also knew when Eddie pointed out the priest and said, you can eat everybody except for him, not the priest. I was like, that's probably a bad omen, which means the priest is going to get eaten. And he was by Carnage.
Yeah. Venom didn't do it, so
Yeah.
at least he listened. Yeah, but no, that fight scene between um, Venom and Carnage at the church location was an awesome fight. I mean, that's what you want to see in a
Exactly.
Venom movie,
Mm-hmm.
and they gave it to us. And isn't it funny that the church setting is so important to the Venom mythos? Because in the comics initially, when when Peter's or when yeah when sorry when Eddie's first infected, isn't it at the church?
Yeah, he is suicidal, and that's where the
Yeah,
symbiote finds him.
yeah,
We also see a bell tower in this. In Amazing
yeah.
Spider-Man 300, Venom actually webs Eddie. Webs Eddie. Venom webs Peter to a giant bell like that, and tries to kill him with the clapper. And Peter is able to pull himself out before that happens. But we see a lot of similar backdrops here. Another scene that I really liked, as you're seeing the big fight scene between the two symbiotes, Shriek, she tracks down Patrick Mulligan, and not only does she hurt him, she tries to put her finger in his eye and like tries to, because she lost an eye because of him, and she says an eye for an eye. And you
Yeah,
see her like,
and that made sense. Yeah,
yeah, her like digging her thumb into his eye and him screaming. So they went light on the blood, but as far as the like the violent imagery, they didn't hold back on that. And
oh
you
no,
really,
it was pretty gross. Yeah, it was
yeah,
pretty
you
gruesome.
can't in a movie about Carnage. So yeah.
And again, uh, it's um, it's more proof that you could kind of really push the boundary of PG-13.
Yes, which they did.
Yeah,
Now, next we get, and this was kind of unexpected. Shriek objects to Carnage's plan to kill Anne. She's like, "Baby, that's too much. You got to stop him." So it's funny that they kind of create a little sympathy here for Shriek, which you already had sympathy for, based on what she went through in the early part of her life.
of
And
course.
then
Yeah,
she realizes here, she's like, you know what, Anne Weying is not, she's not somebody who did anything to us. So you got to stop him.
yeah.
And it's at this point that Carnage overcomes Venom initially, and Venom is trapped in the rubble. And this is the scene that I was talking about, that I felt like I waited 29 years. And in the car with my wife and daughter, who had to hear me cheer like this, when Eddie tells Venom, he's like, look, because Venom's like, we can't beat him. And Eddie says, look, they're not symbiotic. They're not a match. And Venom says, we are. And then he pulls his arms free and he bench presses the rubble, and he's like,
Yeah,
"Together we are the Lethal Protector." And I was like, "Yeah!" I was just like, I could not hold myself back. That moment was absolute perfection.
because that was the line from the comic, right?
I'm sure he said that multiple times, actually.
But in the one that we read, I think that was when they reconnected. They said
Mhm.
that exact phrasing.
Yeah. So at this point, Carnage again has powered up by eating the priest, and he overcomes Venom again. This time, he's close to killing Venom. And another thing I want to point out here that I thought was a nice touch, as Venom is lowering Anne down and he's being stabbed repeatedly by Carnage, if you look at his right eye, you can actually see a tear forming.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was brilliant. My daughter was just like, that is so sweet, because it was like the last thing the symbiote wanted to do was make sure Anne was safe before he's killed.
yeah,
So as Carnage is preparing to kill Venom, he says, "Father, one of us has to die," and you hear Eddie say, "We need fire," and then the symbiote says, "or sound." And I like, again, we talk about kind of shades of gray here. We're made to feel some sympathy for Shriek, and then Venom realizes the way I'm going to win this fight is by killing her, which he does, and he doesn't hesitate. Venom, again, he's a tenacious fighter, and he doesn't weigh a lot of like moral ramifications in the middle of something like this.
yeah.
So I thought it was a brilliant way to end it, even though, again, we had some sympathy for Shriek, and we're like, whoa, that really was lethal. So
I when Venom actually kills Carnage,
mhm.
I was like, when it was about to happen, I remember myself saying, "Is he actually like? Are they actually gonna do it? Like, is he gonna
Yeah.
kill him?" And then when he did it, and he said, and after it's done, he's like, "F that guy."
Right.
I think that of all the times I laughed, that was the hardest I laughed.
Yeah. And I
And my
like how
mom
you
was the same way. She just burst out laughing.
you saw how Eddie was listening to Cletus, and Eddie tried to have some compassion. He understood. He doesn't like Cletus, obviously. He hates him.
Yeah,
But when Cletus was like, "I just wanted to be your friend," and he's like, "I'm sorry, Cletus," and that's when the symbiote was like, "F this guy," and just bit
yeah,
his head off.
yeah.
So before the movie ends, we see actually some CGI, I believe, with Patrick Mulligan. Patrick Mulligan, the original host for Toxin,
Yeah.
the grandson of Venom. So it seems like they're setting up Toxin for the third movie.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of it's a family affair.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why your assertion about your prediction, your speculation about Dylan could be.
It wouldn't surprise me if they go that route. So the scene, so the movie ends
And oh,
on.
just before we
Go
go
ahead.
there,
Go ahead.
that's another way potentially. Like whenever if these movies keep doing as well as they are, whenever Tom Hardy says, "Okay, this is my last one," you could almost do what they're doing now in the comics and pass the torch on to Dylan
Mm-hmm.
and continue the
Yeah,
franchise
they could.
without doing a hard reboot.
Right. That's a good point. So we get the beach scene after we see that Eddie, of course, Eddie and the symbiote are fugitives. And
Yeah,
I believe that Andy Serkis took inspiration here from Amazing Spider-Man number 347. That's an issue where Venom takes Spider-Man to this island so they can have an uninterrupted battle. Nobody will intervene,
yeah,
and he'll finally get his chance to kill Spider-Man. Spider-Man makes him think that he has been killed by like putting part of his mask on a skull that he finds.
yeah,
Peter Parker gets away, but Venom thinks he's killed Spider-Man. So he's like, you know what? There's no more need for Venom. I'll just stay here on this island.
yeah.
And he and the symbiote think they're going to live out their time on that island.
All right, cool.
So I really do believe that that issue was the inspiration
Yeah,
for what we
I
saw.
could see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we get the mid-credits scene, and wow.
Oh, by the way, before we go there,
Go
sorry
ahead.
I keep doing
Go
that,
ahead.
but um, the conversation between Venom and Eddie in that particular scene, where they're like, "Whoa, what are we gonna do now?" And then and then Eddie's like, "We're gonna be, a superhero." He's like, "Oh, we need a costume," and he's like, "I think you have that covered, buddy." And he's like, "Okay, what about a cape?" And he's like, "Nah."
He's like,
That
we
was
need
hilarious.
we need a cape and a mask. And he's like, no, I think we have that covered.
Yeah,
I know that AT&T and WB and DC might get angry at this, but I would love in part 3 if Venom's like running around and like he uses part of the symbiote to like form a cape and like little ears, and he's like, "We are the night." I would laugh my butt off.
that'd be pretty funny. I'd enjoy it.
I also want to point out there's actually an extended scene where Eddie's sitting on the beach, and of course the symbiote tells him, I love you, and the symbiote's like, and Eddie, you love me too, and Eddie's like, well, no, I wouldn't call it love, and the symbiote's like, yes you do, you love me. it's, again, it's absolutely hilarious. So if you get the Blu-ray, I believe it's on the DVD too. Make sure you watch the extended scene.
Yeah.
So what are your feelings on the mid-credit scene?
Uh, I was hyped for it. Of course, it had been spoiled on social media for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between reading it in a tweet and actually seeing the thing. And when you see it, I was like, okay, I need this confrontation.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about is basically
Is
walk
the
them through it.
Exactly. What happens is the symbiote tells Eddie he's going to share some of the knowledge with him, and before he can do that, they are transported to another universe, and the symbiote's like, "That wasn't me." And
Yeah.
then we see J. Jonah Jameson talking on the TV. Eddie is in a hotel room, and we see that J. Jonah Jameson is covering a story about, surprise, surprise, Spider Man. And
Yeah.
Venom seems to have some knowledge of who that is. He's like, that guy, and he licks the screen.
Yeah. And that's how. So,
I also love the guy coming out of the bathroom. He's like, dude, what are you doing in my room? And Eddie's like, I don't know. He has no
so,
answer.
so my question to you now is because he says that guy, does the symbiote have access to knowledge about other universes
That's
where
what
another symbiote has fought Spider-Man?
I'm wondering, because he seemed to know who Spider-Man was.
Right.
So there's got to be some kind of connection.
So we'll have to wait and see where that goes. I may or may not know already where that goes thanks to Twitter,
I do as well. So
but we
well,
won't say that here because
won't say that here. Yeah.
we'll say it when it's our time to review another movie that we want to see but can't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just eventually there's gonna come a day where Spider-Man and Venom interact on screen again,
Yeah.
and I'm here for it. I can't wait for
So I guess it comes time to rate the movie. So you go first, sir.
it. Really enjoyable. It was one of the most fun movies I watched all year. I laughed. It was action packed. It's exactly the kind of experience that I want to have when I watch a superhero film. That level of fun and enjoyment. I think it balances the two tones very well between the humor and the darkness and some of the scary bits. So immensely satisfying. One of my top fives of the year. I wish we could have got a little bit more, like a longer Venom versus Carnage, and a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more Carnage on his own, in certain scenes. Well, I'll say 8.5 out of 10.
Okay.
Are we doing? Are we doing?
You
That
want
would be what?
yeah.
That would be what? A minus.
That would be an A
What-
minus. Yeah. So if you say 8.5 out of 10, sure.
Yeah, A minus, 8.5 out of 10.
So now I have to admit, obvious bias for the character. For me, it was an absolute 10. It cracked my top 5 favorite comic book movies. I doubt very seriously that anyone involved in that movie will ever see this on our little corner of YouTube here. But I want to say to Andy and Tom and Woody and Naomi and everyone who worked on this movie, if any of you ever see this, for a guy who's been, and I'm going to tear up, for a guy who's been dreaming about this for 30 years, you have no idea how much this meant to me. I loved every second of it. If any of you see this, if anybody that worked on the movie sees this, if you can show it to any of them, thank you. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Well said. I know the feeling about waiting for a movie for what seems your entire life, even though it's, I mean, you give or take a few years from when you find the character to when the movie actually comes out. But the sentiment is there. I had it. Unfortunately, the movie that I was waiting for didn't live up to my expectations, like Venom: There Be Carnage did for you. Hopefully, one day I'll get the Batman Superman movie I want. It hasn't happened yet, but there's always hope. But I'm glad you got that experience. You know, you got that for your favorite Marvel character, and yeah, I mean, I could say Alfred did a great job directing this. So it was fantastic. But yeah, there's our thoughts on Venom: Let There Be Carnage. We will again be covering the character of Venom very regularly on here, comics wise, um, and as we get news uh, of um, of movie number 3, we'll cover it. But until then, you can always talk to us about Venom on social media. So, Donnie, where do they find you?
You can find me on Twitter as the Emerald Enthusiast. Let's talk comics. Let's talk collectibles. By the way, I have a YouTube channel where I review a lot of collectibles like this one. Haven't been able to find a second one of this one yet because it is now getting very expensive. But I love this figure. But hey, let's talk Venom on Twitter. Let's talk Green Lantern. Let's talk any comics you want to talk. Emerald Enthusiast on Twitter, on YouTube.
Sounds good. And if you want to find me, it's at Adam_LeesFan on Twitter. We have the social media page for the Twitter page, I should say, for our podcast network at MMNPDC. We have a Facebook group, which is listed somewhere in the description below. Click that. I will add you, and we'll continue the conversation there if you so choose. But until next time, remember that Vetti is forever. From the first time they try to kick each other out of Eddie's apartment to the last. So long, everybody.
You are a loser, Eddie.